Welcome to Everyday English with Annie. Imagine for a moment that you are 7 years old.
Okay.
You are standing in this strange, echoing hallway of a massive building. You blink and, well, you realize your parents are literally walking out the door.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they haven't just dropped you off for the afternoon, they have left you there to live. And you are entirely alone.
That's terrifying.
Great. So how do you survive that? Like, what kind of mental armor do you have to build just to get through the day?
A lot of it, I'd imagine.
Exactly. And as part of your English listening practice today, we are exploring the nuanced vocabulary of success, burnout, and emotional resilience. We'll be doing this by examining a central, rather uncomfortable question. Can ambition make you unhappy?
It is a question that completely challenges the usual narrative we hear about success,
It really does.
And we are exploring this through the factual lens of excerpts from Unfinished, which is the memoir by global star Priyanka Chopra Jonas.
Right.
On the surface, she is the ultimate picture of achievement. But the text reveals the hidden, often painful mechanics behind that kind of relentless drive.
So we're going to trace the evolution of that drive in her life. From those early childhood lessons in reinvention to the grueling realities of the Bollywood and Hollywood hustle.
The really brutal reality.
Yeah, completely brutal, all the way to a devastating emotional crash in New York. And finally, her realization of what true sustainable ambition actually looks like.
It's a huge journey.
It is. So I want you, the listener, to think about your own life for a second. Have you ever worked so hard to achieve a goal that you completely lost track of why you wanted it in the first place? Or, even lost track of yourself?
That is the core of what we're unpacking today. Because ambition isn't just one static thing, it evolves.
Yeah.
And if we don't understand how it functions psychologically, the very drive that brings us success can actually turn against us.
So let's look at where that drive first originated for her. Priyanka grew up as the child of Indian Army doctors, which meant her family was constantly moving from city to city.
Right. And the source material highlights this very specific formative moment. She is crying because she has to leave her kindergarten.
She's just the little kid.
Exactly. She is devastated about losing her friends. And her father sits her down and gives her a philosophy that becomes the foundation of her entire worldview. He tells her to be like water.
I want to pause here for our English learners. When we use the phrase be like water in this context or talk about getting a clean slate, what are we really describing psychologically?
Well, it's a philosophy of extreme adaptability. Her father tells her that moving is actually a superpower.
Because you can just start over.
Right. When you pour water into a new container, it instantly takes the shape of that container. A clean slate means starting over with no history. You can leave your mistakes behind and completely reinvent yourself.
It frames loss not as a tragedy, but as a strategic opportunity.
Precise.
Which, it sounds incredibly empowering on paper, but then we see the mechanics of how this plays out in reality. Because we go back to that 7-year-old girl I mentioned earlier.
At the boarding school.
Yeah. She is abruptly sent away to a strict boarding school called La Martiniere. The text nights, she didn't even realize she was being dropped off to live there until her parents were actually leaving.
And this is where that be like water philosophy is put to a brutal test.
No.
She is instantly stripped of her home and her entire support system.
So how does a child process that kind of sudden abandonment?
They don't. She doesn't have the vocabulary for grief. Instead, she channels all that chaotic emotion into adapting.
And the details in the memoir of how she adapted are just striking. She doesn't just attend the school, she molds herself perfectly to its strict rules.
Right.
Like, she learns to iron the pleats of her uniform flawlessly every single night. She forces herself to eat and even learn to love foods she previously hated, like eggplant.
Which is wild for a 7-year-old.
It is, and when she craves comfort, she doesn't ask for it directly. She fakes being sick by stuffing cut onions into her armpits.
Oh my.
Yeah, to raise her body temperature, just so the school nurse will pay attention to her.
Notice the mechanism functioning there, though. She is translating emotional needs into physical symptoms. Because physical illness is the only language the rigid container of that boarding school understands and responds to.
Wow. That's so true. And there is this one powerful image she uses from the text. The tuck box.
Right, the literal wooden box.
Yeah, where boarding school kids keep their snacks and treasures from home. But she effectively takes all her messy, painful feelings of abandonment and locks them in that box.
She just hides them away.
Exactly. For our listeners practicing their English today, the vocabulary word here is compartmentalize. She learns to mentally divide her feelings and lock them in a separate compartment so they don't interfere with her survival.
And Compartmentalization is a crucial psychological development for her. She learns that her emotional survival depends on pushing forward without ever looking back at the pain.
And it works, right?
It does. She becomes a highly functioning, successful student.
But I have to challenge this societal habit we have of romanticizing extreme independence in kids. We applaud them and say, look how mature they are.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, ambition is often just a fancy word for adaptation. Isn't learning to compartmentalize your trauma at age 7 just laying the foundation for a very dangerous workaholic habit later in life?
You are hitting on the fundamental danger of early survival mechanisms. It keeps her functioning in the short term, which feels like a superpower.
Right.
But if your primary tool for dealing with pain is to lock it in a metaphorical box and perform perfectly well, that box eventually gets full.
Yeah, it has to spill over at some point.
Exactly. And the deeper question becomes, what happens when the container you're trying to fit into as an adult is actively toxic?
Which naturally brings us to her entry into the entertainment industry. She wins Miss World, enters Bollywood, and the stakes get astronomically higher.
The transition here is critical. We move from the childhood need to fit in to an adult need to survive in an industry that is just incredibly volatile.
Brutal, really.
Yeah. And almost immediately, she faces severe, career-threatening setbacks.
We should define a term for our English learners here. Botched. The sources detail a botched sinus polyp surgery she underwent.
Basically a routine medical procedure that went wrong.
Right. It accidentally altered the bridge of her nose.
And the professional and public fallout was immediate. I mean, the media subjected her to intense scrutiny, meaning close, critical, and often harsh observation, and they actually dubbed her Plastic Chopra.
That's awful.
It is. Directors started demoting her to supporting roles just to hide her face from the main marketing materials.
And it wasn't just the physical scrutiny either. The text outlines the rampant favoritism, patriarchy, and colorism she had to navigate. She was called Kali, a derogatory term for dark-skinned, in an industry that heavily prizes fair skin. And in one instance, she was dropped from a major movie completely, simply because the male lead decided he wanted his girlfriend to have the part.
Just think about the psychology of that moment.
If
She was taught at 7 years old that if you perform perfectly and adapt to the container, you will be safe.
Right.
But now she is in a container where the rules constantly change, where you can be discarded overnight because of a male star's whim or a surgical error. Perfect adaptation is suddenly impossible.
So she weaponizes her ambition.
Yes.
Her response to this intense insecurity is to decide she will never, ever say no to a role she believes in. She takes on 4 films a year. She works 15 to 18-hour days, including weekends, for nearly a decade.
We really need to unpack the difference here between joyful ambition and defensive ambition.
Okay, let's talk about that.
Joyful ambition is expansive. You're moving towards something you love. What she was doing was defensive. Her massive workload wasn't just born out of a pure passion for the craft of acting.
It was a shield.
Exactly, it was a protective shield. In an environment where she had no control over being replaced, the only way she felt she could guarantee her safety was to make herself indispensable through sheer volume of work.
Defensive ambition. That is a phrase I want our listeners to really absorb today, because it raises a tough question. When does your drive stop being about chasing a dream and start being a trauma response to the fear of being discarded?
It's a fine line.
It really is. Think about your own life, Are you taking on extra projects at work because you are passionate about them or because you're terrified that if you stop moving, someone will realize you don't belong there?
When you are operating out of defensive ambition, rest feels dangerous. Saying no feels like you are inviting someone to take your place.
You're just constantly on edge.
You're in a hyper-vigilant state, always on high alert for threats. You hustle not because you want to, but because you are terrified of what happens if you stop.
But here's the problem with building a 15-hour-a-day shield. You can't just unstrap that heavy armor and leave it at the front door when you come home.
No, you really can't.
It alters your entire personality.
The psychological overlap is unavoidable. The mechanisms you use to survive at work inevitably bleed into your personal life.
Right.
And the text gives us a very clear picture of how this affected her romantic relationships throughout her 20s and early 30s.
She uses a very specific, poignant phrase. Despite having a fiercely independent mother as a role model, Priyanka admits that in her romantic relationships, she became the eraser and the erased.
That's such a heavy description.
It is. Let's break down that vocabulary for the listeners.
Well, To erase means to completely remove something. By calling herself the eraser and the erased, she is describing a process of total self-abandonment.
She felt so much guilt for working those 18-hour days and being emotionally unavailable that she would overcompensate when she was finally with her partners.
Right.
And for our English learners, to overcompensate means to try excessively hard to correct a perceived problem. She prioritized her partner's needs entirely and erased her own personality just to keep the peace.
Consider the logic she was applying, though. On a movie set, she was a professional problem solver.
A solution finder.
Exactly. If something went wrong, she worked harder, adapted, and fixed it. She tried to control her relationships the exact same way she controlled a movie set.
Which never works.
No, it's impossible. You cannot manage another human being's feelings just by working harder at the relationship and suppressing your own needs. It only leads to profound exhaustion and resentment.
And this habit of managing pain through relentless work reaches a horrifying climax in 2013 when her father dies. He was her absolute rock.
The ultimate emotional toll. And how does she respond to this devastating loss?
She refuses to stop working.
She walled off her grief entirely. She convinced herself that her parents wouldn't want her career interrupted. The text literally says she packed her grief into her luggage.
And just took it with her to every single set.
Yes.
It is the childhood tuck box all over again. She is just taking the messy, painful emotion and locking it away.
You know, I was thinking about this. It seems like ambition can act like an emotional anesthetic.
An anesthetic.
Yeah, it just numbs you so you don't have to feel the pain.
I would actually push that a step further, though.
Oh.
Because an anesthetic implies a passive numbness, like you just don't feel it. What she was doing was an active form of denial.
Ah, I see.
It takes massive, constant psychological energy to hold the lid of that box shut. She was actively using her grueling schedule to run away from processing her father's death.
And society completely rewards this. When someone experiences a massive tragedy and they are back in the office 3 days later, we applaud them.
We call them resilient. Right. We say, look how strong they are, throwing themselves into their work. But we really have to challenge that. Is it actually strength, or is it just the most socially acceptable way to completely avoid human sorrow?
Our culture absolutely praises productivity over healing, but the reality of human psychology is that unprocessed grief doesn't vanish just because you're busy.
He just waits.
It waits, it ferments inside that box.
Yeah.
And eventually the pressure becomes too much for the container to hold.
That brings us to the inevitable breaking point, the crash. The timeline is around 2016 to 2017.
Right.
And on paper, she has reached the absolute pinnacle of success. She is making history as the first South Asian lead on a U.S. network drama, Quantico.
She is flying endlessly between sets in Montreal and Los Angeles, doing press everywhere. But internally, the armor has finally failed.
The sources describe a really deep, heavy depression. She is entirely isolated in a New York apartment. She is gaining weight, actively avoiding her friends, not sleeping well.
She describes sinking into a specific safe spot on her couch and just disappearing into it.
The breaking point always arrives when ambition can no longer outrun unhealed emotions.
Exactly. The defensive strategy of working 18-hour days finally collapsed under the weight of her unprocessed grief. She couldn't be like water anymore because the water had frozen.
Wow. That's a great way to put it. This is where she has a massive realization. She recognizes she wasn't just running toward a Hollywood goal. She was actually running away from her grief.
Yeah.
So how does someone who has spent her entire life making grand, sweeping, ambitious moves actually heal?
Well, that is what makes her recovery process so fascinating. It did not involve some massive new project or a dramatic career shift.
What does she do?
Her healing was entirely about micro-adjustments, very small, intentional changes in her daily routine.
The text mentions incredibly small steps, like moving from her safe spot on the couch to just sit by the window to look at the sky.
Right.
And getting a puppy, her dog Diana, which gave her a reason to care for something outside of her own head.
But the most crucial shift was in her relationship with time. She finally allowed herself free time.
Just to do nothing.
Literally nothing. She started giving herself 3 or 4 hours a day to just exist. No producing, no memorizing lines, no problem solving.
The irony of that is staggering. For her entire life, resting felt like a threat. It felt like failure. But giving herself that unstructured time actually made her more productive in the long run.
Because true resilience isn't about ignoring pain or being perfectly adaptable to every toxic situation. It is about recognizing that control is an illusion.
Yeah.
For decades, she used ambition to try and control her environment, her status, and her feelings. Sustainable ambition requires making room for the messy, uncontrollable parts of human life, like sorrow and the absolute necessity of rest.
It fundamentally challenges our cultural definition of success, doesn't it? I mean, is our definition of ambition completely broken if it views resting as a failure?
I think so.
Mm.
It's a profound unlearning process. She had to dismantle the very coping mechanisms that made her famous in order to actually survive her own life.
Let's distill the core takeaway here for our English practice today. Ambition is an incredibly powerful engine. It can drive you out of a small town, it can help you survive incredible odds, and it can build a spectacular career.
Definitely.
But if you only have a gas pedal and no brakes, no ability to stop and process your emotions, and no steering wheel to know why you're driving in a certain direction, you will eventually crash.
Into a wall.
Yeah.
We saw this perfectly illustrated in Priyanka's journey. She went from a hyper-adaptable child surviving boarding school to a fear-driven, burnt-out star, and finally had to rebuild herself as a grounded individual by learning the value of stillness.
Which turns the mirror back on the listener.
It does. And that brings us to a crucial reflection for you today. It's time to evaluate your own mental tuck box. Are you packing away your stress, your sadness, or your exhaustion just so you can keep performing at work or at school?
It's a hard question to ask yourself.
It is. Are you using your ambition or even just your daily hustle to run away from something that really needs to be felt? Opening that box is the hardest work you will ever do, but it really is the only way to achieve genuine emotional resilience.
I want to leave you with one final provocative thought from the very end of our source material. After rebuilding her life, Priyanka established what she calls her 90-10 rule.
Oh, this is so good.
Right. She realized that she willingly gives 90% of her life, her energy, and her time to the public, to her career, and to her ambitions. But 10% must remain entirely private.
Just for her. And for our vocabulary focus, we might call that 10% a sanctuary, a safe, protected place where ambition is simply not allowed to enter.
A sanctuary just for her. So I want you to mull this concept over on your own today. In our hyper-connected, relentlessly ambition-driven world, can you ever be truly happy if you don't fiercely protect a 10% of yourself that your ambition is never allowed to touch?
Food for thought.
Absolutely. Until next time, take a moment to look at your own drive and don't forget to build in some brakes.